Adding a turret into a VR game is certainly very interesting, especially for VR shooters. And while it might not be perfect for everybody, it's certainly very interesting, can lead to a lot of other great mechanics. In addition, it can be much more reliable to use a gun with one hand in VR than it can be to hold in two, as it can be a little bit difficult to hold both hands steady while in VR, especially since they don't have any way of interacting with one another in a virtual space. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through how to set up a very simple VR turret that you can use in any VR game. But before we go ahead and jump into that, if you enjoyed this video and want to see even more just like this one, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, let me know what other kind of tutorials you guys would like to see in the future. And with that, let's go ahead and jump right into the video. Now I've gone ahead and opened up a nice little template project that we have here in Unreal Engine 5, let me note that. It will still work in Unreal Engine 4, however, this whole process. I have done all of this turret setup in Unreal Engine 4 and still had it work. So let's go ahead and start by opening up our player. Now, actually, before we go and open up our player, let's actually first create an interface. So in order for this to work, we're going to need an interface that we can use with our turret. Now, if you've never worked with an interface before, what it simply is, let me go ahead and create this real quick, interaction. What a interface will do is we can attach this to a specific actor or a pawn or anything like that. And using this interface, we can first off check to see if an actor specifically contains this interface, which is great for something like interactions, since we don't need to have to check to see if it is within a certain class or anything like that. But also we can call functions from this interface without having to cast to the actor or anything like that. So we don't need to cast to turret or anything like that. We'll have everything work just fine. This will just quite simply make everything a lot simpler. So let's go ahead and create two functions over here. You can see they're over here on the right. I'm going to call one grab. I'm going to call the second one release. There we go. And also for the grab, we're going to want to pass through a motion controller as well, so that way we know which hand we need to grab with. So let's go ahead and also do that as well. So let's go ahead and grab motion controller. I realize that this may actually be in the way of the camera there. But there we go. So right here, I've gone ahead and named it motion controller, and then we're going to want to make it a motion controller component. And that's going to be an object reference. And that's all we really need to do here for the interaction. So let's go and close that. And let's go and open up our player now. Blueprints, VR pawn. All right, so for our VR pawn, we already have some things kind of set up. So we already have our basic input actions for our grabs, and we already have all of our motion controllers here in the same area. Now there's going to be some difference between Unreal Engine 4's default player and Unreal Engine 5's VR pawn. Unreal Engine 4 splits the player into 3 parts with 2 different actors. Actually, I think one's a pawn and one's an actor, but it basically splits into 3 different parts. The motion controllers won't be here on the left like you see here in Unreal Engine 4. They'll actually be somewhere within your variables. You'll have 2 variables. I believe one's called left controller, the other one's called right controller. These will be references to motion controller components, which will contain your motion controller components. Actually, they may be called BP motion controllers. I think that's what they're called. But anyways, so you're going to want to look down here into your variables. I believe they're the first 2 variables that actually show up here for the for the Unreal Engine 4 pawn. So let's go and start here. I'm actually going to disconnect our grab rights and our grab left, because we're not going to use the code that we already have here for both of these. I'm actually going to move these out here. Let me actually move these somewhere we have a lot more room. So now we have our input actions over here separated off from where they were originally. So this is where they originally were. Let's go ahead and get started with actually detecting our turret and through our interaction interface that we had already created, and get this all set up here. So we're going to start over here. We're going to out of press, we're going to want to first sphere overlap actors. Now what this will do is it will be used to check to see what kind of actors we have within a sphere radius around our point. Since we're dealing with the left with our grab left, we're going to want to deal with our motion controller left. And we need this to be in a world location, not relative as well, since that's how the sphere is going to function, is going to be given a sphere position, or I'm sorry, a world position. And then we need to set a sphere radius. I'm going to start with 20. I think 20 may not be an appropriate size for most circumstances. However, I think it'll be good enough for what we need here, especially since our hands don't collide with anything. It'll just be nice and easy to work with. Next, we need to give it an object type. So let's go ahead and do make. Now, I may be remembering wrong, but I believe if we want, I believe the object type that we want to check for is world dynamic. We may need to come back and change this because I may be wrong about that, but I'll double check that once we are in our turd as well. And now we don't, as you can see, I can compile and that's not going to cause any errors. However, I do want to add at least one actor to ignore, and that's going to be our self. Now, the reason I want to make sure that we're ignoring this actor is because we don't want to accidentally reference ourselves, even though it doesn't have an even though our self does not have an interaction interface here. I still don't want to reference it just because I don't want to have to deal with, for some reason it accidentally comes up. Maybe later on I modify this so we have something that happens with non-interactive items. I just want to make sure that our self is not going to interact and get picked up by this overlap actor at any point. So I'm going to go and add that in as our actors to ignore. Now let's go ahead and check our out actors here. So we're going to want to feed this through a for each. Now you can see we have two for eaches here. I'm actually going to do a for each loop with a break. And the reason for this is I'm going to want to break it off once we find an actor that we want to use. Now, there are of course alternatives. We can check to see what actor is closest or anything like that. However, this will be a lot quicker to do and just quite frankly will save on a little bit of time. And I don't want this tutorial to run any longer than it needs to. So I'm going to go ahead and do a for each loop with a break. Now we're going to want to first check to see if our array element, let's go and check here. We're first going to want to check to make sure our array element contains the interface that we want. So we can actually see down here it does implement interface. And we need to give it the interface that we already made. This is going to be the interaction interface that we made. Go ahead and branch. There we go. And then I'm also going to do one more thing. Let's go ahead and create a variable here. Let's go ahead and call it left grab actor. Now down here, this is actually a little bit messy, so I'm actually going to do, I'm actually going to change its category. So this is actually a nice little tip if you've never played around with categories before. You can actually give it a category and it'll actually categorize it up here, so we can actually keep everything nice and a little bit more organized. They don't do that with a lot of the variables, unfortunately, with the VR pawn. I think they're a little bit better with it with the Unreal Engine 4 pawn, but quite frankly, I'm not dealing with all these and it'll just make it a little bit easier to find things. So let's go ahead and grab our left grab actor and let's first check to see if it is valid. There we go. Now, assuming that it is not valid and we do have an actor that is in fact valid, let's go ahead and grab our left grab actor. We're going to want to set this now. It's not valid. Our array element is going to need to come in here. Since this is the actor that we now want to set for our interaction, go ahead and feed that across. And then finally, we're going to want to call our grab function, which we actually already did. You can actually see once I type in grab, you can see under class interaction, I can go and call that. You're going to want to make sure too that target is interaction. That's going to make sure that we are calling the grab function from the interface that we already implemented. And so that'll just call that and make it nice and simple. And lastly, let's go ahead and grab our left motion controller. There we go. And I'm then going to want to feed this around to our break to get that out of our way here. So that way we're all done here. So let me go ahead and feed this around. There we go. I'm actually going to raise this up a little bit as well. There we go. And that is all of our grab functionality there. Lastly, our release will fortunately be a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and right over here, we're just going to want to check to make sure our grab left actor is valid. We always want to make sure that things are in fact valid before we start calling functions and such with them, just because we don't want to have any unnecessary errors or anything like that. And release. We can already assume that it does contain the correct interface, since it'll only be set to left grab actor if it does in fact contain the interface in the first place. So it'll make things nice and easy here. All right, so real quick thing that I did almost forget here as well. We also want to set our variables here to go back to null. So that's going to be for both of our interaction left and interaction right. That was something I accidentally did forget to go and handle here. So we do want to remember just set those back to null. Otherwise, this will actually not work correctly, because to the player, this is always going to be valid because it's always being set up. So we want to make sure that this goes ahead and gets set back to null. So there we go. And that's all of that for our left grab. Let me go and copy all this, and we're going to do the same thing for our right grab as well. So let me go ahead. It's quite a lot of code there. Go ahead and drag this over, press, release. We just need to change a couple variables here real quick. So let's go and grab our, well, this is actually a reference technically, but we do still need to change this as well. So we need to make that right motion controller. We need to also create a second variable for our right grab actor. So let's go ahead and call right grab actor. And now that we've already actually created a category over here, we can actually hit this drop down and you can actually see it now shows up in there. So that makes things really nice to use. So now let's go ahead and get this right grab actor, feed that in. We don't need that left anymore. And then let's see here. Right grab actor also needs to go here. Oh, not set. Get there. And then we need our motion controller right. Oh, deleted the wrong one. Hold on, there we go. And go and feed that up. And I'm also going to go ahead and throw these all into a couple of comments just to keep things nice and organized. I'm just gonna call this turret, actually we'll call it interaction right hand. Now, if you've never done a comment or anything, all you need to do is press the C key. I believe you can also right click and there's actually an option that you can do comment as well. However, I just always hit the C key. It makes things nice and easy, a little bit quicker as well. But that is all that we need to do now for our right hand, or for our VR pawn. So we're all good here. So now let's go and jump over into working with our turret. All right, now that we're all done with our VR pawn, let's go ahead and jump into our turret. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go right again in our blueprints folder. I'm going to create a new blueprint class called actor. And I'm going to call this turret. Let's go and get that opened up. All right, now that we have our turret open, we're going to need to first, let's start here with the viewport because we're going to need to do a couple things here. We're going to start by grabbing a cylinder and we're going to set this as our default scene root. Now this cylinder is actually not required. However, the reason I want to have a cylinder is that what I'd like to do is set it as basically a base, so that way we can kind of visualize where the stand for our turret is at all times. Like I said, this isn't necessary. We're gonna have a kind of root component that's actually going to rotate with our hand in order to actually follow around our turret as well. So we're going to start with this little base. Let me actually rename this to, I'm just going to call it base. Next thing we're going to want to add is a cube. Now this is just going to be basically a kind of stand-in for our actual turret itself. So let me actually go and resize this. It's going to be kind of difficult to size correctly simply because you can actually see it. Our scaling values are actually kind of different because we've already rescaled our cylinder and that's kind of a root component. So we're kind of going to eyeball it right now until we get something that looks a little like this. I think that looks pretty good like that. And then I want to add on two more components here. First one is going to be a scene. Ooh. And we're going to call this fire, let's call it bullet spawn. Now we're not going to use an actual bullet for this scenario. Let me actually rename this to call it turret. We're not going to set up an actual bullet for this example. It's not letting me reposition it. There it goes. That's weird. There we go. So we're not going to use an actual bullet for this example. What I'm actually going to use is a line trace. However, I still need some kind of point in order to determine where the start of our line trace is. If we were using an actual bullet, then that's where we would spawn it, is right here, wherever the bullet spawn is. And there's one more thing I want to add. Now, this isn't a necessity either. However, I do want to have a nice and simple, go and grab that, a nice and simple, if this will work with me here, a nice simple little reticle that we can use here for kind of aiming. Now this isn't going to be perfect. As you can see, I'm just using a sphere and kind of putting it towards the front of our gun. That's kind of how it's going to work. I'm going to scale this down a little bit more. However, I will be having a tutorial on how to make a proper reticle in the future. So if you want to check that out, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on that. But for now, we're going to use this little sphere. This is going to be a rough reticle that we're going to use as kind of a stand-in for our turret. So now we have all this, let's go and jump over to our event graph now. We're not going to need the begin play or the actor begin overlap. However, we will need our event tick here in a little bit. But let's go and start with setting up the grab and release functions from our interface. Now these both have to be overridden, and we can actually see once we mouse over functions here, we actually get an override tab and we can actually look up all of our functions here. So I actually want to find here, where is it, grab. I'm also going to go and grab our release. You can actually see too, it shows that it's part of an interface, in this case the interaction interface. So let's go and grab both of those. And we're going to do a couple things here. So let's go and start with our event grab. We're going to need to promote our motion controller to a variable. I'm just going to go and drag it out and do promote to variable. And we'll go and leave it called motion controller. I think that's a pretty good name. And then in the circumstance that we release, I'm actually just going to set this back to null. There we go, just like that. All right, now real quick before we go and jump over into our tick here, there was something I did almost forget as well. Here within our turret, we actually need to go down here and change this from block all dynamic to overlap all dynamic. The reason for this is that if we block everything, it may not get picked. It may start acting a little bit funny when we go to do our overlap in the player. So overlap all dynamic will just make sure that it will get picked up. We're not gonna have any issues there. But anyways, going back up here to our tick now. This is basically all we need to do for our grab and release. Most of the heavy work is going to be handled by our tick function here. So let's go ahead and grab our tick here. And I'm going to do a, let's see here. Let's grab our motion controller. Check to see if it is valid. There we go. And then assuming that it is, then what we need to do is we actually need to determine what our rotation for our turret will be. So in order for this, we're going to need to first get the world location of our motion controller. And we're also going to need the world location of our turret mesh as well. So let's go and get the world location of that as well. And then we're going to want to get find look at rotation. Now this is used to find a rotation between 2 points, what the rotation should be from one point to another. So what we're going to want to do is take our start over here and our turret into our target. And we're going to want to set world, nope, that was the wrong thing. Set world rotation, there we go, on our turret. And let's go and drag this down over here. All right, so I went ahead and gave this a quick test run. I did actually find that there was a small issue here, and it's mostly just due to the way that we currently set up the turret. And we have a couple different options here. We can either fully flip around our turret, because currently it's trying to place our hand over here, when in reality we want it over here. Or alternatively, we can actually go in here. We can actually swap around our fine look at rotation here by simply taking our motion controller and throwing that as the target, and taking our turret and throwing that as the start. That will swap around everything, so we don't need to worry about having to deal with it in the viewport, since that can be quite a long process, especially if you have a lot of things going on there all at once. So, but yeah, there's a nice little quick guide if you find that it's firing in the wrong direction or something. So yeah. Now, depending on your setup, you may need to do some reconfiguration to either the scale or rotation of your turret, or perhaps you may need to swap or otherwise invert the look at rotation that we get out here. We may have to do that as well here, but I will talk about that real quick as well if we do need to make any adjustments to this. But this should all work. I'm also going to go and set this to sweep. That isn't necessary. Actually, I'll go and enable both sweep and teleport. Neither of those should be necessary, but I'm going to go and set both of those regardless. And finally, on is not valid, what we're going to want to do is we're going to go ahead and take this, and we're going to set the rotation of our turret. Set rotation. Set relative rotation is what we want. There we go. Again, this isn't necessary, but this will just kind of make sure that our rotation goes back to its origin point. This is just kind of a nice little thing to have in order to make sure it goes back and we don't leave it in some kind of weird orientation or anything like that. So yeah, so we'll go and leave that as well. So now that we have just about everything done for our turret, we have it now moving with our player. We now need a simple way to fire off a bullet from our bullet spawn point that we already set up in our turret. Now, ideally what we would have probably done is set up a third function in the interaction interface, or maybe we would have set up some other function here within the turret itself in order to actually fire off an actual bullet. However, this tutorial is honestly run on quite a while, and I don't want to drag this on any longer than it needs to be. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to do a delay. So after we grab, we're going to roughly 10 seconds after, we're going to go and fire off a line trace. This will be a nice simple alternative to a bullet actor, and it will allow for us to make sure that our bullet spawn is actually a good point for us to fire from. So in order to do this, we're going to first want to add in a delay. So let's go ahead and grab that. I'm doing this off of the grab function from the interaction interface. I'm going to set this duration to 10. Like I said, this is quite a long duration, so you may want to do something a little shorter if you're just doing this for testing real quick, but that's up to you. And then I'm going to want to do a line trace by channel. We go and drag this out. So now for our line trace, we need a start point and end point. And just about everything else is really good here, since we're not concerned about accidentally hitting ourselves, hitting the turret in this case, or anything like that. So let's go and start with our start. For our start, we're going to want to grab our bullet spawn, and we're going to want to get the world location of our bullet spawn. That'll be fed in. And our endpoint, we're going to want to, so our endpoint's going to be a little bit different for this turret. If we actually go and look into our viewport and we pull up our bullet spawn here, we actually see our red arrow for our x-axis is actually what determines what our forward vector is. Our green vector is going to be our right vector, and our blue vector is going to, our blue arrow is going to be our up vector. Now, because we want it to fire away from our turret, we want for it to go the opposite of where our forward vector is. Now, this is actually quite a simple little fix to do. If you have your turret kind of flipped in like this, So quite simply, all we have to do is go right in here. We're going to get forward vector. And this is probably a little bit standard if you've ever done like a very simple line trace like this before. We're going to want to multiply this by a float. And typically this float would be how many units out we would like to go from our current position. Now for our example, I'm going to go maybe about 1,000 units out, but because we also want it to go in the inverse direction, we also want to multiply this by a negative value. So we're going to multiply this instead by negative 1,000 rather than 1,000, since I would go back into the gun. And then we're going to add our world location that we have here to our forward vector, add that into our end point here, and that gives us our line trace and we're all set to go there. So now after 10 seconds after we grab, we will now get a line trace that we'll be able to see. Actually, we do also want to make sure that this is for duration as well. I did almost forget that. Change the draw debug type to for duration. By default, it's set to none. If it remains set to none, then you won't see it, so you won't actually know if it's getting fired off. By setting it to for duration, we'll be able to see it, and we'll be able to see that it is in fact firing it off. So now let's go and jump into VR, and we'll go and give this a quick test run and see how this goes. All right, so I've gone ahead and started this up. You can actually see right over here we have our turret. Everything else is empty in this scene. So let me actually go and come up a little bit closer. So you can actually see, currently we have our makeshift reticle here. And you can actually see it's currently facing me. So if I actually go and reach out and grab it, you can actually see it immediately flips around. And if we actually give it a couple of seconds, we should actually see our line trace go ahead and spit out here in 1 second. There it is. So you can actually see that cube over there, by the way, also marks where it actually hit. It actually isn't a very long reticle, so I can actually show you the length here too. If I actually go and fire this out into the air, but you can see as well, it is capable of hitting other objects within the scene as well. There it goes. You can actually see right over there, that's where it ends. That's where our line trace over there is ending as well. So as I said, it's not very long, and you can actually see where it fired from our fire point right over there. And so yeah, and then we have our little makeshift reticle. Of course, there's a little bit of work that probably you would want to do to something like this in order to make it something very good within your own game. But I think that for any kind of start off for building a turret within a VR game, this is really cool and is really nice to have. So yeah. And with that, that is a VR turret that we can use within any scene. As I said, this turret is very base, so it is a very base version of a typical turret that you'd probably see in most games. And because of that, it is very open to modifications, and you can certainly do a lot with this in the long run. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below. And with that, I will see you in the next reality.